Hi everyone, this video is a book review video, but it is also a birthday celebration video. So today is July 25th, 2022, which makes this the 81st birthday of Emmett Lewis Till. Emmett Lewis Till was a 14-year-old African-American boy who was lynched in 1955 in Mississippi, and every year I try to celebrate his birthday by reading at least one book about his life in order to, remember him, pay homage to him, and also to learn more information about the case. I learned about Emmett Till when I was 14 years old, which was the same age as when he was lynched, and I've just been obsessed about the case ever since. I've read a couple of books on him, which include these. And I've created, art about him. The first art piece I made was this tapestry where I stitched the people that were involved in the case, his mother, Milam, Bryant, and all of that onto a tapestry, but I don't know what happened to that art piece. Then I also made two little enamel pieces in college. One was of his mother and one was of him. I made these in like 2008, 2009. You can wear them as a necklace, but I keep them in a special place. I also wrote a lot about him, and I ended up creating a poem about him, which I illustrated and put into a book. So even though this book is small, it is basically my poem and other information about Emmett Till, so you can learn about the case and learn his story and all of the references I make in the poem. This one I published in 2020, and I did the writing, the illustrations, and the layout. So if you'd like to get it, I'll put my website in the description box and also in the link below. Also, if you hear any noise in the background, that is my box fan because it is very hot in this room. I'm also wearing a button that says Black Kids Matter because I also want to discuss more about the safety of Black children and how it can tie in with the Emmett Till case. Now, the book that I am going to be reviewing for this video is called Let the People See, The Story of Emmett Till, and it was written by Elliot J. Gorn. So this book was published in 2018, so it's not quite old, but it's kind of new. And I really enjoyed reading it. It was chock full of information, and I found that some of the questions that I had asked when I was reading other books ended up being answered in this book. Now, before I get into the review, let me share with you a little bit about the author, Elliot J. Gorn. I am on the website, the Loyola University of Chicago, or Loyola University, and I'm on there because it seems that Elliot J. Gorn does not have a website, so his information is on the school's website. It says Elliot J. Gorn got his PhD at Yale University in 1983 and an AB from the University of California, Berkeley in 1973. He is the Joseph Gagliano Professor of American Urban History and has a distinguished record of scholarship, publication, and excellence in teaching and student mentorship. His books and articles embrace multiple aspects of urban and American culture, particularly the history of various social groups in American cities since the 1800s. Gorn's work is interdisciplinary and intersects with numerous other fields. So he's written a couple of other books. He's also edited and co-wrote with other authors. He's published and reprinted more than 50 articles, book chapters, and reviews in scholarly journals, encyclopedias, collections, and news magazines. He also, and I thought this was pretty interesting, it says his teaching focuses on modern United States history, particularly social, cultural, and urban history. He has taught courses on the history of sports, Chicago, masculinity and gender, film biography and autobiography, war and American culture in the United States survey. He also was a Fulbright, I want to say he was like a Fulbright scholar somewhere. And he also taught at Brown University and Purdue University and Miami University of Chicago. Miami University of Ohio and the University of Alabama. So he is a very well-read, well-versed, well-trained historian and author. And I noticed that some of the things that he had studied in the past, like societal relationships, really came out in his book about Emmett Till. But anyway, when I read this book, the chapters were relatively short. They weren't very long, but they weren't too short. There were about 34 chapters, and each went into detail. It would share dialogue. There were a lot of things that I learned in this book that I did not come across in the other books about Emmett Till. Emmett Till's mother's book was like a first-person account of like how Emmett Till was as a child. You get to learn more of his personality. The Blood of Emmett Till, that book, what stood out to me with that book is that the author actually interviewed Carolyn Bryant, which I had never seen in any other book. The Emmett Till, the lynching of Emmett Till, a documentary narrative, that one was basically newspaper articles and how writers responded to the lynching. Simeon's story, which was written by Emmett Till's cousin, gave more insight onto the family of Moses Wright. This book really went deep into the relationships between North and South. I had seen this issue come up in other books, but he really went into detail in regards to like the relationship between the North and South and how Emmett Till's lynching became politicized. With each chapter, he has a photograph at the front. So, for example, this photograph is for chapter 1, Murder. Oh no, I Seen Two Knees and Feet. So this photograph right here, this is Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Bradley. This is her on the front, Mamie Till Bradley. And she's being held by, I want to say her boyfriend or fiance, or her fiance's near, then the pastor, and then I think her dad. Yeah, I think this one is her dad. And this is when Emmett Till's body was coming from Money, Mississippi to Chicago in a double box because they had him packed in lime in one box and then put it in the other box with the state seal of Mississippi. This right here is a photograph of one of the days of Emmett Till's funeral or wake, or open coffin so people could view his body. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of people that came. Now, when the author begins this book, he says two things that really interested me, that stood out to me, and I'm going to share them with you. Because one part I've heard, and then the other part, I don't know whether I agree with it or disagree with it. So the first part is the things I've heard. He starts off, "We all know the story. In late August 1955, a 14-year-old Chicago kid named Emmett Till went to visit family in Mississippi. At a crossroads store in the tiny Delta town of Money, Till whistled at the white woman behind the counter. A few days later, he was kidnapped, beaten, and shot. His abductors weighted his body down and threw it in the Tallahatchie River." So here's the part that I've heard before. A friend of mine from Chicago was also 14 when they murdered Emmett Till. He told me recently about the photo he saw back then in the newspaper, a photo of Till's body after it had been pulled from the river, his face crushed, a cotton gin fan tied around his neck with barbed wire as a weight. No such photo exists. No journalists were by the riverbanks to take pictures, and the police photographer who waited back at the sheriff's office in Greenwood took the official photos long after they cleaned the muck off Till's body and removed the weights tied around his neck. Maybe my friend was thinking of the funeral pictures taken a few days later in Chicago, which now have become horrifically iconic. When Mamie Till Bradley saw how savagely her son had been beaten, she asked the mortician not to prettify him, and more, she insisted on a glass top over his coffin. "Let the people see what they did to my boy," she famously said. Now, the photograph about the river, like his body by the river, that's the second time I've actually heard that. I hadn't heard it in so long, I actually thought, like, maybe I had read something wrong. Like, maybe I was mistaken. But now that I see that in there, it makes sense, because he was right. There were no journalists or photographers there. But in the collective consciousness of lynchings, there's so many facts that people get incorrect because lynching was so common. It was such a fear-based practice, so full of hatred and wickedness, that people would take something extreme and make it even more extreme. They would add different things to it that possibly didn't happen. Like in this book, there's a couple of instances to prove that Emmett Till was not castrated. A lot of people, even today, when I talk about the Emmett Till case, they always say that he was castrated, but he was not. His mother mentioned that in her own book because she checked his body. And if you read the court transcripts or the records of the people on the stand, you will see at least 2 or 3 instances of people that actually viewed his body that basically said he was not castrated. But I thought that was pretty interesting that he mentioned that piece. The next section, or he said, "But I am sure my friend did not see those photos either. He is white. He was not a reader of Jet magazine or the Chicago Defender, 2 publications that carried them. African Americans across the country saw the pictures. They passed them around and discussed them and took grim determination from them. While mainstream newspapers and magazines devoted lots of coverage to the Till story, none published the photos of Emmett's battered face. Few white Americans saw those now infamous images until video documentaries of the civil rights movement made by African Americans began to appear in the late 1980s. Now, that part, I don't know if I agree or if I disagree with him. Because how could they not see it if Emmett Till's story became global? I know they weren't subscribers of Jet magazine or anything, but like, how could they not see it? But then, on one hand, he might be right, because when you are racist, most racist people are very myopic. They'll only see things through a very clouded, narrow lens. So that possibly would make sense, like his friend not seeing the pictures, because they never really paid attention to black magazines. They never paid attention to black creations unless they were stealing the creation. But other than that, or trying to make a profit off of it themselves. So I could see where he's coming from, but I'm still on the fence with that. Since Emmett Till's story reached outside of the United States, it became a global issue, which was used especially with people who are trying to promote whatever agenda they were trying to promote. Anyway, so I'm going to go through some of the things in this book that sort of stood out to me. It talks about lynching. This chapter 5. The case seemed simple at first. A kid violated customs he little understood and paid with his life. Most people in the South were horrified by the murder. They had little doubt that J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant committed the crime and that the body in the river was Till's. But race was involved, race and sex, so nothing remained simple for long, especially not at that moment in history. The drama playing out in the Mississippi Delta took place as old ideas, policies, and traditions were becoming unstuck. In the decades following Reconstruction, the Southern states installed a regime of white supremacy that, despite some challenges and variations, remained quite stable for more than half a century. Then fissures began to appear in the walls separating white and black. Deeply American institutions, the Army, for example, and the Major League Baseball had integrated, at least nominally by the 1940s. Yet by mid-century, in the context of a rapidly escalating Cold War, a number of African, Asian, and Latin American leaders spearheaded homegrown nationalist movements, anti-colonialist and anti-imperialist to their core. Newly liberated peoples in the Third World cast a skeptical eye on America. Could it really be a beacon for freedom overseas while oppressing people of color at home? So I thought that beginning of that chapter, like, there were so many ideas that were going through my head. For example, he talks about lynching. It just seemed like we're horrified by the murder. I didn't realize that there was a difference between murder and lynching until I was a teenager. I just thought lynching was murder. But apparently murder can be done for any reason. Like, you can murder somebody because you're jealous of them. You can murder them out of a crime of passion. You can kill them off because they're successful, or I don't know. It could be any reason. Whereas lynching is mainly a hate crime. It's very systematic. It is usually composed of vigilantism, and in the past they tried to, I guess, make more of a definition of lynching. They'd be like, well, it has to be this certain amount of people or this certain amount of people, and this is usually what they do. Like, lynchings could have two people involved. It could have 2,000 people or more involved. There were lynchings that were small, and there were lynchings that were large. Most lynchings, even though they try to promote it as just, oh, you're being hung from a tree by a rope. When I think of lynchings, just based off of what I've read in 100 Years of Lynchings, it was full body mutilation and burning. Like, most lynchings seem to be burning to me. The chopping off organs, chopping off body parts, tying you to trees, burning you, taking your body parts as souvenirs, taking photographs, fondling people. I've read of, like, them fondling people, like groping men and women. So it was basically like rape as well, sexual assault. I'm pretty sure somewhere along the line they ate them, because I'm like, why would you not eat them? I know that sounds kind of extreme, but I do remember reading about, like, people having mummy unwrapping parties where they would eat parts of the mummy. So maybe somewhere along the line they ate parts of lynching victims. I wouldn't put it past them. Because if you're gonna just tie somebody to a tree and burn them and hear their screams of death and have no response, I don't know what else you're capable of. So when they were trying to pass Emmett Till's lynching as a murder, they were trying to downplay the, I guess, societal response to Emmett Till's lynching. Lynching not only shines a light on the lynchers, but the society around the lynchers. Lynching is so ingrained in a lyncher that you could have a person just minding their own business, like a lot of Black people were doing back then. There was one person that got lynched for saying good morning. There was one person that got lynched. He accidentally brushed up against a white woman. There was a story where W.E.B. Du Bois was walking with this woman. I guess she was light enough to pass. And he noticed that all of these different strangers were getting into the role of being lynchers. They were like preparing for a lynching. They didn't even know each other, but they were all on code. You will see this on code thing, especially if you're reading the transcripts of the trial. Everybody was on code, no matter how ridiculous no matter how ridiculous the claims from a racist person's mouth were, everybody played to make it seem like it made sense. Another thing, he said it involved race and sex. Around the time of Emmett Till's lynching, the Brown versus the Board of Education had passed. So now schools could be integrated. And a lot of people did not like that. A lot of parents took their children out of schools. They were protesting against it. One of their claims was that they feared for their white daughters having like Black boys in the class. They feared that some type of miscegenation, is that how you pronounce it? Racial mixing would occur if they had them too close of a proximity to Black boys. Black girls, they just treated basically the same as Black boys. Personally, I don't know why these parents sent their children to integrated schools. I'm talking about the Black parents. I don't know why. I guess they felt the education would be better, that they'd have more opportunity. But me personally, I don't think I could do it, because you're sending your child to a place, you're not there. They're by themselves, defenseless, with people who are the descendants of people who basically lynched you, lynched pregnant women, lynched children. Like, I would be afraid something would happen to my child. So you must have had to be a parent who was either a prayer warrior or was just trying so hard to use any method in order to change the society at large by utilizing your child in order to do that. So this was the environment Emmett Till was entering into. And he talks about North and South, how North and South responded to Emmett Till's lynching. I don't know, sometimes if you're reading just a basic history book, they make it seem like, oh, all the South was evil and the North was good, when there was racism in both areas of the country. There was racism in the North, there was racism in the South, there was racism in the East, and racism in the West. It was all over the country. They just, sometimes they had different ways of expressing it. A lot of people according to the author, after the lynching of Emmett Till and his murderers or his lynchers being set free, it also seemed like the South was divided. You had one group that was like, yeah, that's good that you let them out. It's good that you let them free. Like, they didn't do anything wrong. They were just defending their woman. Then you had other Southerners who were like, if you don't claim them guilty, I will be ashamed to be a Southerner. Because they felt that Milam and Bryant were bad representatives of the South. They felt that if they were allowed to get away with this killing, with this lynching, it would make the South look as if the people there were full of lawlessness and immorality. So it was a very divided thing. Then you had a lot of black people leaving the South, going to the North during the Great Migration because they felt there were better opportunities in the North. They knew there was racism out there, but I guess they felt it was a lesser evil than the racism they were experiencing in the South. I believe that's how we ended up in St. Louis, because my great-grandmother lived in Arkansas, um, and she moved to St. Louis in 1922, so we've been here 100 years. She moved to Kinloch, which is a was a black town in St. Louis. But I also had some other, well, not ancient cousins, but old cousins in the South. Like I had a cousin named Classy in the 1880s. She owned land, or lots of land, and they ran her off of her land. I don't know who they were. I'm assuming it was the Klan or somebody else, but they ran her off her land, so she moved as well. And that's basically the reality black people were facing back then. Like, I can either stay here and be lynched, or I could go north and be spat upon. Like, I don't know. I don't want either of them, but I don't want to be dead. So it says, trial. So this section is called trial. This photograph is of Moses Wright, Emmett Till's uncle. They stole Emmett Till from Moses Wright's house, and he never saw him again. And this is him pointing out Emmett Till's lynchers, saying, there he is, pointing out Roy Bryant and J.W. Milo. And this is the jury. Basically, like, an all-white jury. That really didn't do any justice at all. Like, they are all just working for white supremacy, trying to stay on code. Sorry, I'm flipping through the book, getting to the chapters that really stood out to me. So chapter 13 stood out to me because this chapter interviewed the Black Undertaker, Chester Miller. And the reason this chapter is important is because racist people were promoting the notion that Emmett Till's body was not Emmett Till. They kept saying, I didn't know if he was black or if he was white. I didn't know if that was a man or a boy. And if you push this notion of whether the body is or is not Emmett Till's, then technically there would be no case. They were also pushing the whole notion of, are you sure it was his body, because it was so badly decomposed, it looked like it could be in the river for 10 days instead of 3 days. They were also implying that his injuries came from the cotton gin fan instead of being beaten and getting a bullet shot in his head, which I thought was just very, very disgusting. I can't think of another word. These racist people went to such lengths to discredit the truth that this trial seemed almost like a clown circus. They contradicted themselves so much. I'm surprised they even remembered their own name. Like, what the heck? But chapter 13. Chester A. Miller, an undertaker with 16 years' experience, most recently as manager of the Century Funeral Home in Greenwood, was next on the stand. Whites and blacks had separate mortuaries, funeral homes, and cemeteries. White undertakers occasionally handled black bodies, but only by mistake would white people seek out a man like Chester Miller to care for one of their own. The very fact that the Lafleur County Sheriff's Office called on the services of a black funeral home indicates its belief that the corpse was African American. And still, They denied. It's almost like a Shaggy song. Remember that song, It Wasn't Me? Even though she saw you in the kitchen, she saw you in the bedroom, she saw you everywhere. She saw you with her own two eyes, but it wasn't me. That is basically what this case is like. It's so obvious, but it wasn't. No, that's not Emmett Till's body. Even though it looks like him and basically wearing his clothes, that's not him. And in 2005, they I guess unburied, or what is that word? I don't remember. They unburied Emmett Till. They did DNA testing, and lo and behold, who is it? It's Emmett Till. It's not somebody that the NAACP planted. It's not some corpse that was in there for 10 days. It was who they said it was. Assistant District Attorney Robert Smith questioned the witness for the prosecution. Miller told the court that he had received a call on the morning of Wednesday, August 31st, from John Ed Cothran, the LaFleur County Deputy Sheriff, asking him to drive 30 miles up from Greenwood to the Tallahatchie River, just past the town of Phillip. Miller, who is the black undertaker, and an assistant arrived around 10 a.m. Now remember, this is John Ed Cothran, deputy sheriff, white guy, called the black undertaker. And you see him switch on his words when you get to his little trial. They knew they had come to the right place when they found a gathering of people. So these are the questions that Smith, the prosecutor, was it Smith? Yeah, the district attorney, assistant district attorney, asked the black undertaker. So this is what he said. I'm going to just skip to the most important parts. Did anyone present there at the scene identify the body as any particular person? Miller said, yes, sir. And who did they identify it as being? The court says, that is if you know. Breland, who's somebody else, I can't remember who he is, but he's just a rabble-rouser to me, for real. We object, Your Honor. That calls for a conclusion. The court, the objection is overruled. So Smith continues with this question. Who did they identify that body as being, if you know? Miller, the body of Emmett Till. And then Breland objects again, and the court overrules it. Breland here argued that Miller's answers went beyond mere assertions of fact to conjectures, opinions, or secondhand information. Judge Swango disagreed. I really don't know how it could be assertions, like he was literally there. Like, he took the ring off of Emmett Till's finger. And some of the skin fell off, which was kind of disturbing. The skin was apparently slipping off of his body. Smith, did you later find out who the person was who identified the body that you testified to? Yes, sir. And who was that? Most right. Have you seen Uncle Most since then? Yes, sir, I have seen him since then. And you know that was Most right? Yes, sir, I know him well. Now then, I will ask you, in your business as an undertaker for 16 years, and mind you, 16 years, have you seen a number of dead bodies in that time? And then Breland's like, I object to that leading form of the question. The court, objection overruled. So Smith asked again, have you or not seen lots of bodies during the time you have been in your profession? Miller, yes, sir. Smith, in your opinion, was the body that was there in the boat that you took out of the boat and put in your ambulance, was it possible for someone who had known the person well in their lifetime to have identified that body? And Miller says, yes, sir. So, they're just going, they're talking, and, okay. This is where he gets into the description of the body, and just reading this one section will prove to you that Emmett Till was not castrated, as people keep saying because they don't do their research. Smith, will you give the jury a description of that body as to size, age, weight, and so forth? Miller, well, it looked to be about 5'4" or 5 inches in height. Weight between 150 or 160 pounds. It looked to be that of a colored person. Smith, could you tell whether or not it was the body of a young person or a middle-aged or old person? Miller, yes, sir. Well, the flesh in the palm of the hand, well, it looked like it was the body of a young person. And from certain parts of the body, well, in my experience, in handling those kinds of bodies, by certain parts of the body, it looked like a youth more so than a grown person or an older person. Miller delicately referred here to the body's genitals and pubic hair, or lack thereof. The corpse he described clearly fit the description of Emmett Till, but was there evidence of murder? Attorney Smith asked about the condition of the body. Now, according to this book, after you start asking, or after they were asking some like racist people about Emmett Till's body, they were making him seem larger than life. They were making him seem like he was just this grown, sexually crazed beast, like the Incredible Hulk. And what's very interesting is that's not the first time this has happened, because you're in a society where lynching or the causes of lynching could be anything. As I stated earlier, rape was not just rape. Rape was you touch a white woman's hand, you're in an interracial relationship with the white woman, or you accidentally brush against her, or you look at her too long. Like, there were also cases of white people darkening their skin to go out and rape a woman so they could blame it on a black person. Like, but lo and behold, like, what about all the black women that were raped? Like, did you forget about that? Like, where's their lynch mob? I know, it's the whole double standard. But it's just funny how they would switch backs in the trial. They would just lie through their teeth for them all to collectively stay on code, even if they sounded like an idiot, even if they said something completely different the day before or an hour before. They would just switch their stories. Anyway, Miller said the crown of his head was just crushed out and in, and a piece of his skull just fell out there in the boat, maybe 3 inches long, or maybe 2.5 inches wide, something like that. Smith, now don't tell what your conclusion is, but just state what the wound was there about the head. Miller, I saw a hole in the skull. Smith, and how big a hole was it? Miller, oh, about maybe 1/2 inch square, something like that. And where was that hole? Will you point it on your head to where it was? It was somewhere around there above the ear. And that is about 3/4 of an inch above your right ear, is that right? Yes, sir. Was there any hole or similar thing on the other side of his head? And Miller said, well, it was crushed on the other side. You couldn't tell too much. It was crushed there, and it was all cut up and gashed over the top there. Then he says, will you state whether or not the wounds which you have described here are sufficient to cause his death? And then Breland objects, and the court was like, I'm going to let the witness answer the question. And so Smith asks again, and Miller says, yes, sir. And this is why he said that. Because they were trying to make it seem. In fact, let me read what the author means. Smith turned the witness over to the defense for cross-examination. A hole through the victim's skull might look like a bullet wound, but without an autopsy, one couldn't conclude that, could one? And the same was true for all the bodily trauma. It was impossible for a layman to say what exactly caused these injuries. Nor could anyone but a medical examiner tell for sure when the wounds occurred. They could have even happened in the river long after death. Wasn't that so? So all these injuries caused by the river. They're trying to really make it seem like this was not a lynching. They were really trying to make it seem as if these wounds were caused by the freaking river. Did the river tie Emmett Till to a cotton gin fan with barbed wire? Like, I'm pretty sure that looks like a bullet hole. I'm pretty sure that looks like the gashes of an axe, but that came from a river? Like, how? The cotton gin fan isn't on. So where'd he get all these injuries? It had to be before. He didn't tie himself. But you know, that kind of reminds me of this story I read in 100 Years of Lynching, where they either lynched this black man who wouldn't take off his uniform, or no, it was a black man in the military, and he either got beat or they like sliced his ears, and they said he did it to himself. That's what that reminds me of. Then Miller basically said that if a body is bloated, it was somewhere in here, like if a body sustains a lot of injuries, and if the person is overweight or has a lot of fat, that can make the body deteriorate faster. So think about what happened to Emmett Till. He was beaten, he was shot, he probably was hacked up by something like an axe or whatever. He was already like a plump boy. He wasn't like obese, but he wasn't skinny. He has these open wounds. He has these open gashes. The water can get into his wounds. He already has fat on him. He's going to decay faster. Then you throw him in a freaking river. So now your body's expelling and swelling. And you're being eaten by fish. Of course his body's going to look crazy. Of course it's going to look like it's been in there 10 days. Because you have the fat content of his body and you have his injuries. So, of course, it's going to deteriorate faster. Then you add water. Come on now. Like we were born yesterday. Then they go to Deputy John Ed Cothran. And this liar, he switched up too. When they were interrogating him, no. It wasn't Chatham. It was Sheriff George Smith. So Sheriff George Smith admitted that Bryant admitted to kidnapping Emmett Till. And this also shows the fact that everybody knew this was a black boy, because this is how the conversation went. And I'm just going to read this one section before I move on to other chapters. So Gerald Chatham led Sheriff Smith through a series of questions before a hushed courtroom. Till was abducted about 2 a.m. on Sunday morning, and the authorities were informed not long after daylight. Early that afternoon, Smith drove over to the grocery store and money and awakened Bryant. The two men spoke in the sheriff's car. Chatham asked Smith if he had threatened or intimidated Bryant in any way or had offered him any reward or immunity from prosecution. No, said Smith. Bryant made his statement freely and voluntarily. So Chatham asked this. Mr. Smith, go ahead and tell about the statement that Mr. Bryant made to you that Sunday afternoon. And Smith said, well, I just asked him about it. Chatham, what did you ask him? Smith, I asked him about going down there and getting that little nigger. Chatham, will you please go over that again? Smith, I asked him why did he go down there and get that little nigger boy, and he said he went down and got him to let his wife see him to identify him, and then he said she said it wasn't the right one, and then he turned him loose. And where did he say he turned him loose? He said right in front of the store. Did he tell you where he went to go get Emmett Till? To most rights. So Sheriff Smith noted that it was about 3 miles from the grocery store back to Wright's house, and he asked Bryant why they didn't bring young Till home. Bryant replied that the kid knew the way back. This just discredits all of your stories about it not being a black body. About it not being a black body. Like, come on now. Like, he got kidnapped. You just admitted to kidnapping in court and you didn't go to jail. Like, make it make sense. So, the trial, he talks to Deputy John Ed Cothran, and he said he couldn't tell if the body was white or if it was black. He also asked, had the privates been mutilated, and he said no. Just very sad. But the best speech had to be by Chatham. It had to be by Chatham. He gave a very long. Hold up. I should have had these pages, but I didn't. I'm sorry. He basically said, Chatham basically remarked that all of this was some bullshit, which was true. This was not just a random murder, Chatham began. The killing was planned from the start. The first words that entered this case were literally dripping with the blood of Emmett Till. Those words were J.W. Milam's after he and Roy Bryant forced their way into Most Wright's house. I want the boy from Chicago who did the talking at money. So they had the intention. Then Chatham emphasized that he was from the South. He said, I was born and bred in the South. I'll live and die in the South. The very worst punishment that could have occurred or should have occurred if they had any idea in their minds this boy did anything would have been to take a razor strop, turn him over a barrel, and give him a little beating. Yes, Chatham told the jury, I'm a Southerner too. I understand the codes. But what Milam and Bryant did was way out of proportion. I've whipped my boy. You've whipped yours. A man deals with a child accordingly as a child, not as a man to a man. Then he says, Milam and Bryant, this is like verbatim. Milam and Bryant kidnapped Emmett Till. They admitted it to the county sheriffs. An eyewitness saw Milam with Till hours after he claimed to have released the boy. Till's body was positively identified by his mother and by his uncle. The ring found on the corpse identified or confirmed his identity. The defense says the body was too badly decomposed to be Till's. Then why? Too badly decomposed to tell if it was black or white. Then why, Chatham asked, did officials without hesitation call a funeral home to come pick it up? The prosecutor drove his point home. Everyone who has testified here has stated that this was the body of a colored boy. When the sheriff was first told of the body, his informer said, there is a little nigger boy in the river. Everybody who saw the body said, nigger boy in the river. But now Dr. Ogden comes and says he could not determine if the corpse was black or white. I tell you, the prosecutor thundered, the people of this state are wasting their money sending a man to school and educating him to be a doctor when he is not able to tell a white man from a Negro. And Chatham added, if he can't tell black from white, I don't want him writing any prescription for me. Man, that last part made me laugh so hard. I had to put down the book. I'm like, what? I had to read it again. If he can't tell between black and white, I don't want him writing any prescription for me. But yeah, after that, there is a chapter in here, and I don't know which chapter it was, but it goes into detail about Mamie Bradley's relationship with the NAACP and how they basically had a cordial falling out it was almost as if they were trying to control what she was saying. They were trying to control um, where she spoke, it seems, like not wanting her to say too much, trying to really polish her into something. I don't know. It just seemed kind of suspect. I've never really trusted the NAACP personally. Like, they do good things, but their history is kind of just all over the place. It seems almost as if they're trying to pacify the situation or downplay the assertiveness of Black people that were involved. That's why you had the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, because some people, they wanted to go through a steady and slow wins the race, we will do this legally, and others were just like, I'm taking over everything. I'm not waiting for the law, because the law was never on my side. Then, I also forgot to mention earlier when I was emphasizing about like how they were trying to make Emmett Till seem like a complete beast. They did that with his father's case, and this book also goes into detail of his father, Louis Till. Now, mind you, Louis Till was executed in Italy with, I guess, some other men. He was accused of rape. I don't know if he did it or not. I don't know. I still have to research more about that. But he goes into detail of what supposedly happened and all sorts of things, which I didn't come across in very many books. After Emmett Till's father was executed, Emmett Till was sent back, or the military sent Louis Till's ring back to Emmett Till and his mother. This is the ring. I have it in my book too. But this is the ring. And this is my father's ring, which ironically looks kind of like Emmett Till's dad's ring too. But they brought up his father's story in order to make him seem more like a predator. The only reason that Emmett Till's father was in the military was because he had abused Emmett Till's mother, and they gave him the option to either go to jail or to go to the military. So he decided to just join the military. Also, hold on. Man, there's so much information in this book, I literally could not possibly do every single chapter. I was mentioning also about like how they personified Emmett Till. I saw the same thing happen in Ferguson. I have lived in St. Louis all of my life, different parts, and one part was Ferguson. I spent a bulk of my childhood in Ferguson. Like, I would go to Forestwood Park, ride my bike. I would go to the Quick Trip that got burned down during the protests and get my ice cream, and their gas pump or their air pump for the bicycles would never work, like, ever. There's McDonald's down there, and there's a Domino's. Like, I know that whole strip. I don't know if it looks the same, but, like, I didn't think of it as Ferguson. I just thought of it as West Florissant. Because you had West Florissant, Chambers. So I lived sort of around the area or near the area of where Mike Brown was murdered. And I do remember in the early days of his murder, or of his lynching, his killer, the cop, basically compared him to the Incredible Hulk. He's like, it was like the Incredible Hulk. So you're shooting at a dude and he's running towards you. Like, that doesn't make any sense. The only time I've heard of somebody running towards bullets and continuing to run towards bullets is that man that was on, I don't know what he was on, bath salts or something. Was a man that ate off somebody's face. But that's the only other zombie case I have heard of somebody running towards their own death. for real. And even the fact of how Emmett Till's case became politicized reminded me of Ferguson as well, because it went from being just a lynching to being like something way bigger on a global scale. Communism and all of that. And it seemed as if his story just got lost in the mix. But the reason it's still alive is because a lot of people were traumatized by seeing his image. Even though Emmett Till's lynching was not the beginning of the civil rights movement, because there were other instances that like triggered and began the rolling stone of the civil rights movement, I feel Emmett Till's lynching was possibly the straw that broke the camel's back. Because number one, it was a child. Number two, revealing his face. If they had had a closed coffin, it wouldn't have been as big. But now, just seeing the ghastliness and horror of his face does something to your psyche. Like, you can't unsee it. It's very traumatic. People would have nightmares from seeing what was done to Emmett Till. And a lot of these people were the young people that either started the civil rights movement or started the Black Power movement, because they were around his age. But anyway, they tried to politicize Emmett Till. They tried to use his story for their causes. Huey, the one that wrote the Look magazine article interviewing Brian and Milam, confessing the murder and stringing it with lies, was trying to make a profit off of Emmett Till's name. And after a while, people just added to their story or added lies to the story or would try to use it for, their cause. And I saw the same thing happening to Ferguson, because initially, in Ferguson, the ones who initially brought the case, the murder of Mike Brown, to light were the first people that were there, the Ferguson frontline people. They were the ones that really brought the story to, or the murder to, the limelight. Those original people, most of them all Black, if not all Black. I personally, when Ferguson happened, I heard about it. I was actually living on Grand and Shaw, and around that time, that's when Von Derek Myers got murdered further down Shaw. So there were protests going on in Ferguson, because it happened August 9th, 2014, and there were protests happening on Grand and Shaw for both Ferguson and Von Derek Myers, who was murdered in October 2014. But as I stated, I didn't believe anything was going to happen with that, because nobody had responded in a way that was to my liking when it came to other murders of Black youth and Black children. There was one youth, it was Jeremy Robinson, who was murdered in 2006 or 2007. He was killed by a cop. Shot maybe like 6 times. He was only 15 years old. And nobody really went after that case. Like, there was not such a big response as it was to Mike Brown's case. I think because they left Mike Brown out there in the sun for 4 hours, that's really what really triggered it. Whereas Jeremy Robinson, they shot him, and then they shot him again when he was on the ground in his back. That case was overshadowed by the finding of Sean Hornbeck and Ben Omby. And you didn't really hear about it ever since then. But in the beginning, I was protesting with Ferguson and doing all of these things. But I started seeing the protests changing because people with their own agendas were coming through. It started off as just like locals. Then it became like, oh, look, I'm from this organization. Here's my card. I'm such and such a thing. Here's my business card. Yes, we just started this non-for-profit about blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, look, you're just missing the whole point. You're literally missing the whole point. Like, you're moving away from the core of the issue, which was police brutality and the lynchings of young people. The same is still going on now, like with black femicides. It's like, we're just going to dance around the issue. Ha, 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 ha. But the only ones really bringing black femicide to the light are black women, making it a very big cause. Another thing in this book, he talked about the black people that were involved in Emmett Till's lynching. But I do not know what chapter it was in. I should have marked the page, but I didn't. And I do apologize. Ugh, it's a bug. Okay. Apparently, there were at least 2 or 3 black men that were involved in Emmett Till's lynching, or were there, or helped with the cleanup. I personally don't think they just did it on, like, hey, let me go help. I think they were frightened. They were intimidated. They felt like they were in danger, and I think that's why they were involved. Almost like the black people that were at lynchings. As a teenager, I never understood why there were black people at lynchings. And I asked my teacher, and of course she couldn't tell me, but nobody could answer my question. But now I feel a lot of people were either pressured, especially with this case. They were pressured. They were like, hey, you're going to do this, or I'm going to shoot you, or I'm going to make you lose your livelihood. Or maybe some black people were there just to be a presence there for the lynching victim, so they knew they wouldn't be alone. Just imagine you're being lynched and you're surrounded by all of these hateful people, and all you just want is someone with some humanity in their eyes. That's how the founder of the Black Holocaust Museum, he was about to be lynched. And the only thing that saved him was a woman's voice screaming, that boy is innocent. And he said it was like the demons or something left the eyes of the people, and they let him down from the lynching tree. That's how he survived. Just thought that was very, very sad. Now, this last chapter kind of blew my mind. And it talks a little bit about Carolyn Bryant. Hold on. They were talking to her sister. Her sister-in-law. Oh, goodness. Carolyn Bryant had long since divorced Roy, and he died in 1994. She remarried, moved to Brookhaven, Mississippi, divorced, married again, and moved to Greenville. Each time the Till story lurked back into public notice. Reporters tracked her down looking for comments, and hate mail flowed again to her home. She did her best to ignore it. When the FBI caught up with her, She told them she had just received a phone call telling her to rot in hell for what she did to that little boy. "We know what you look like," the caller said, "and the same thing that happened to Emmett Till could happen to you." The federal agents told her they would help local police track down harassing calls and letters. They also reassured her that her conversations with them were strictly confidential, that probably no one would be charged with crimes. Bryant told the agents that she had not spoken to anyone about Emmett Till since 1955. She could not even remember who drove her away from the store after they arrested Roy. Carolyn Bryant now recalled the first time her husband was away overnight. "Memory is a funny thing," one of the FBI agents remarked. "Yes," she replied, "when you're scared to death." Juanita Milam was even more closed-mouthed at first. She convinced herself, or at least tried to convince her FBI interlocutors, that she was not in the building when Emmett Till walked in, but rather in Greenville visiting her parents. Juanita Milam, this is the wife of J.W. Milam, added a few grace notes. So she's trying to, gas up her stupid ass husband. But okay. Rest in hell, J.W. Milam. Roy Bryant, unlike her husband, could be a little hot-tempered. After Carolyn Bryant divorced Roy, she remarried a couple of times and she drank too much. That's what she said about Carolyn. The federal agents asked Mrs. Milam what she thought had happened to Emmett Till. "I still don't know," she replied. "But what do you think happened?" She said she didn't think about it. The feds persisted, arguing that all the stories from Carolyn Bryant and other family members didn't add up. So apparently, according to this book, there may have been some of their relatives, or at least one or two of their relatives, involved in Emmett Till's lynching, or at least in the cover-up. The federal agents suddenly, this part, girl, suddenly Juanita Milam let her guard down. "No, they didn't add up," she agreed. Carolyn getting so upset over a whistle or a wink. That's the point that don't make sense to me. The feds saw their opening. Carolyn told us, and apparently she said at the trial back then, that he grabbed her wrists, grabbed her waist, and said that basically he wanted to have his way with her, and he would be back. That's what she told us a month ago. What do you think happened? It was more than that, wasn't it? Juanita Milam said something quite unexpected. The only way I can figure it is that she did not want to take care of the store. She thought this wild story would make Roy take care of the store instead of leaving her with the kids and the store. That is the female point of view. Girl, Carolyn, you did all of this so you wouldn't have to work at the store, according to your sister-in-law, and rest her soul in hell too. Yeah, because she's dead. Everybody thinks Carolyn Bryant is dead, and she's not. I keep telling people, look, didn't she die? No, she's not dead. Y'all do your research. Her sister-in-law is dead. Where was I? The agents were incredulous. They asked if she was saying the whole thing never happened, that Carolyn Bryant had simply made up the story of the assault to get out of working at the grocery store. "Well," Juanita replied, "Till might have winked or whistled. His cousins even said that he whistled." And then, seemingly unrelated, she started talking about how she had been around black people all her life, how she had good black help, how she never expected them to bow down to her, how she was not afraid of black people. The implication was clear. Carolyn Bryant made up her story about Emmett Till, worked a whistle or a wink into an accusation of sexual assault or to a near rape, because she was scared to death of being alone with black men. From the female point of view, that terrified Carolyn Bryant, and only her husband could protect her, take her away from this lonely store, rife with what a young white Delta girl had been taught to fear all of her life. Juanita Milam was the only one who ever told the story this way. She was in a position to know. She had been there, in the store and in the family. The two sister-in-laws were intimate. They talked about the incident shortly after it happened. Oh my God. We know that Carolyn Bryant changed her story, making it more lurid in the days between her first discussion with her attorneys and the trial itself, though not terribly specific. Carolyn Bryant mentioned one last thing to the FBI. Agents asked her about a recent article in the Delta Democrats claiming that Mamie Till Bradley, shortly before she died, expressed a desire to talk to Carolyn Bryant about that night so long ago. I wish many a time that I could have too, Carolyn told them, but nobody ever contacted me, and I didn't contact her because I didn't figure she would want to talk to me. Not everyone longed to be reconciled. She needs to be in jail. This is so much hypocrisy. When I think of Emmett Till's case, I just think of just utter hypocrisy, racist people being on code, people just being complacent, people being run over with fear. They just were so afraid. Now, right now, there's still, police brutality going on. There's still racism prevalent, all of that. Black women being murdered, black femicide, black children being kidnapped and killed as well. Black children, just like Emmett Till, are still being adultified by racist people. Even, especially like young black girls, they try to make them seem so hypersexual. They try to make them seem like they're just prostitutes out in the street. Like, I had that same issue happen when I was a little girl. Like, people, or at least some of my white classmates, thought I just knew like all sorts of sexual things at a young age, or treated me as if I was like more sexually developed than they were. It's just very, very sad. The children don't have a voice. Young black boys being, thrown out in the street and adultified. Like, none of these children are allowed to be children. Yes, they're going through puberty. Like, puberty, most children go through the same things with puberty, They'll be expressing their emotions, they'll be developing, they'll be going through all sorts of changes. But when it's a non-black child, it's natural. But when it's a black child, all of a sudden they're a criminal or they're out in the streets. And I know this is true because I've worked with black children. I've worked with children since I was 14 years old, and I stopped when I was like 24 or 26. And I saw it with my own eyes, how educators would talk to black girls and how they would talk differently to white students. How a black child could do something, they'd automatically get punished. But if a white child did something, they were innovative or creative, or they were an entrepreneur. Or even the ones that were trying to be like, oh yes, I'm being multicultural and stuff. Just not completely understanding the culture, like, or classifying all black children into one box, as if these children don't have different backgrounds. You have black children that are like in impoverished communities, you have black children that are in the suburbs, you have black children that are super religious, and you have ones that have no religion at all. So, but you're going to classify all of them as if all of them are poor. All right. I see. Just raising awareness that the Black child's plight is still not over. You have Black children still being harmed today, even from birth, especially like the maternal death of Black women in hospitals. There was an incident in St. Louis a couple of years ago where a Black woman and her guy, who was also Black, they're giving birth, or she was giving birth, and the doctor decapitated the baby during the birthing process and then tried to shove the baby back into the woman to make it seem like it was an accident. And the only reason this doctor was caught was because of a nurse that had some type of morality. I feel Emmett Till's story and his lynching should really remind us of, I guess, the evil that is still prevalent in our society. You might not see it. You might not see an entire lynch mob coming, but it's still going on. It's not over. We still have a lot of work to do. There was a Black man a couple of years ago, I think it was in Mississippi. He got beheaded and they left his head on his neighbor's porch. Yeah. So, Emmett Till's story should not be a story of just like trauma and tragedy. It should be a story that should inspire us and empower us. Because the only reason his story is known to this day is because of us. We were the ones that brought it to the spotlight. We were the ones who did something about it, and we still have that power. We can change the course of events if we really, really want to. By holding ourselves accountable, and also by keeping the overall goal at hand, getting our ego out of the way. Because our children are dying out here. They're disappearing. They're being kidnapped. They're being killed during the birthing process. Black kids matter, as my button says. They matter. So thank you everyone for watching this video. I hope you have a wonderful day. Remember Emmett Till on his birthday today. I hope that you all can research more about him if you want to find out more information. There are plenty of books that you can read. So talk to you all later and happy reading.